Welcome to ILTV Security Brief. I'm Khaled Ben David. Each week, we focus on the latest developments and security and defense relating to Israel and the Middle East, impacting on this region and beyond. And we start with our top items of the past week. In the latest wave of Iranian missile attacks on Israel, direct hits on Beersheba's Soroka Hospital and buildings in Ramat Gan and Holon wound several people, some seriously. While most of the rockets have been intercepted, at least 22 people have been killed since the war with Iran began, more than 1,100 injured, and thousands more left homeless after their homes were destroyed. After 1 week of continued aerial bombardment, Israel says Operation Rising Lion has destroyed Iran's air defense systems, degraded its missile capacity, and damaged its nuclear facilities. President Trump has called for Iran's unconditional surrender as the U.S. weighs whether to launch its own strike on the key Fordow nuclear site. Amidst the Iran war, the IDF's operation to wipe out Hamas's military capability in Gaza and free the hostages continues. 2 reserve soldiers, Captain Itai Moshkovitz and Staff Sergeant Neve Leshem, were killed by explosive devices in 2 separate instances, and Sergeant Stav Halfon was shot dead by a sniper in southern Gaza. After 1 week of Operation Rising Lion, Israel's war against the Iranian regime, the IDF have scored major unprecedented achievements. Israel's surprise attack destroyed Iran's air defense systems, attaining quick supremacy of the skies. It eliminated nearly all of Iran's military leadership and 9 of its top nuclear scientists. It caused serious damage to Iran's ballistic missile and nuclear programs, and its success has undermined the authority of the repressive rule of the mullahs. But this comes at a price, with Iran's missile attacks, though largely deterred, still taking a significant toll on the home front, in civilian casualties, in destruction of homes, and disruption in the lives of every single Israeli. Well, joining us to assess the situation is Jonathan Conricus of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and a former IDF spokesperson. Jonathan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Khaled.
Jonathan, let's try. This is an unprecedented situation, an unprecedented conflict for Israel. We don't know what kind of benchmarks we have here, but give us an assessment of where we stand now with this operation.
Well, to put things into perspective, I think this is a historic moment. And I don't remember ever using those words to describe anything military. I think this is a once-in-a-lifetime event for the State of Israel, and definitely for Iran. Israel has been at the receiving end of about 25 years of offensive operations, indirect warfare by the Islamic Republic against Israel through its proxy organizations, and twice last year, in April and in October, direct attacks on Israel, missile attacks. And now, finally, Israel has found the right political, diplomatic, and military opportunity to strike Iran, to undermine its nuclear program. And I think that we are at the cusp of bigger things, and maybe Israel has additional goals that we haven't yet really fully said, but I think really an historical moment that has tremendous potential, most of it positive, for Israel and for the region.
Well, we'll get to those other goals in a minute, but let's talk with the most significant aim of this current operation, that is knocking out Iran's nuclear facilities. Where does that stand now? How much damage, based on what you know, what's been made known, has Israel succeeded in damaging those nuclear plants?
Well, damaging, definitely, no doubt. There's damage, confirmed damage to Natanz, to Isfahan, in Tabriz. A few days ago, we also attacked Arak, and there's various levels of damage, but we don't yet know the overall picture, and we cannot yet say how far this has pushed the Iranian nuclear program back and how far this places them from the capacity to, and this is of course the important part, to actually manufacture nuclear weapons. That is still unknown. There are various assessments out there. There's, I think, a bit of a campaign going on trying to minimize Israel's achievements. We've seen pieces in the New York Times and elsewhere. And then we've seen information from the Atomic Agency, who have people on the ground, and based on Israeli intelligence, that is indicating that, yes, significant progress has been made. You mentioned Fordow in the intro, of course, for good reason, because that is believed to be an absolutely crucial piece. Without taking that out, I think Israel will fall short of achieving what it needs. And now the big dilemma is, how is that going to happen? But bottom line here, significant damage, and it's a matter of time, because Israel has achieved aerial dominance. Israel can continue to strike all targets at will all across Iran, and as we're speaking and just before, that is what Israel is doing. So I think it's only a matter of time before that goal is achieved, and we'll have to focus special attention on what's going on in Fordo.
Well, since you raise it, I mean, the big question that's been asked is, can Israel, on its own, basically knock out Fordo, or does it need the active intervention of the U.S. military to do so?
So conventional wisdom and what lots of pundits are saying in studios and writing dictates that no, that Israel must have the help of B-2 strategic bombers with 30,000-pound bombs that'll be dropped, and they penetrate the solid rock and then the bunkers, and that only that can do the job. I would offer a different perspective, and I'd say that Israel has proven quite a lot of, how should we call it, military creativity and creative use of military force in this operation against Hezbollah. And I wouldn't, I think it would be very hard to imagine that Israeli contingencies have not planned for exactly this moment, where US is thinking about, contemplating yes or no to deploy those bombs, and yes or no to become kinetically involved in this war. And I think Israel has a contingency, and now Israel is waiting to see what America decides. But eventually, if the US decides not to, I'm quite sure that Israel has a military option ready. And I struggle to see a situation where this war ends with Fordo intact.
Right, but if the U.S. would involve itself, and we know it does have the capacity to take out Fordo and do much more significant damage elsewhere in Iran, what would be the consequences? How do you see the scenario playing out in terms of, for example, the Iranian response, and then what Israel's role would be in the war?
So that would definitely change dynamics. It would, of course, turn it into a much more global issue, not just regional between Israel and Iran. It could add risk to US assets, and it could perhaps invite other global players to feel tempted to be drawn in. And that's, of course, something that I think the US wants to mitigate. But I think at this stage, when I look at Iran's military capabilities, and I am very careful not to sound complacent, but when I look at what Iran has left to bring to the table, the tools that they have, it's not very impressive. Their missiles have been struck. Most of the missile launchers are they're still there, but at significantly degraded capabilities. Many military installations, Revolutionary Guard and their command and control has been hit, and they are not in a good tactical situation. So to be threatening the US or other countries would be a very odd endeavor. But if the US decides, out of its own interest, to join in this war and deliver the so-called final blow to the Iranian nuclear program, that would, of course, be escalatory, and it would open up a regional and global dynamic that we're not yet seeing today.
Right. Now, you earlier spoke of perhaps Israel has goals beyond what is publicly stated. We should say earlier, Israeli leadership said regime change is not one of the goals of the war. There's been certainly ambiguity of whether the Ayatollah Khamenei was a target. But we are speaking, and we should mention this, Jonathan, just after a Iranian attack, direct attack on Soroka Hospital in Beersheba.
Yeah.
Clearly, it was targeted. It's not near any military installations.
Yep.
Does that change the game? And what would these other goals be that perhaps you referred to?
I think it has the potential to. I'm not entirely sure that it will, because the Iranians, they already hit national infrastructure. They hit the oil refineries in Haifa, killed 3 Israelis. That was 3.5 days ago. And Israel decided strategically not to expand the target base and not to start chipping away at Iranian facilities and Iranian national infrastructure. That was a strategic decision, even though the Iranians already attacked Israeli national infrastructure. And by the way, the Haifa oil refinery, it is out of commission, and it's not working now because it was hit by the Iranians. So Israel would be justified, in a sense, to do tit for tat and to start chipping away at Iranian. But when we talk about targets here, I believe, even though Israel has not said it and acknowledged it officially, I think that it is a goal of Israel. I think Israel aspires to it and hopes for that to happen.
To see regime...
To see the regime fall, yes. To see the regime fall, to see the Iranian people take to the streets and overthrow this oppressive regime. I think Israel is aware of the limitations of its own power. We're a nation of 10 million. The Iranians are a nation of almost 100 million. They're about 30 times the size in terms of landmass. And there are significant differences, and I don't think that Israel sees itself as kingmaker and ruler of Iran. No such ambitions. But what Israel has been is suffering from the offensive strategy of the Iranian regime for 25, 30 years. And to remove the regime or to cause it to be significantly weakened and overthrown, I think would be a strategic, long-term positive outcome of this war, which would do great for the Iranian people, great for stability in the region. It could advance prosperity significantly, and from an Israeli perspective, of course, give us much more breathing room, far less terrorists with far less money that will be able to attack us, as all of the Iranian proxies have. Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, proxies in Syria, proxies in Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen. All of those were tied together in the Iranian network. And if the Iranian regime is toppled, then that puts a serious dent in the efforts against Israel.
It would be certainly a game changer for the region. I want to turn to the home front, Jonathan. Certainly, Israelis were warned by the military and security experts that the air defense systems, the Arrow, David Sling, Iron Dome, are not hermetic, and a certain percentage of rockets would get through. But I do feel, especially as we talk now, following these attacks in Beersheba, in Cholon, Ramat Gan, that a lot of Israelis are wondering, is the air defense system working as it should, as expected, or have the Iranians managed to surprise the IDF in some ways?
So I think that overall, despite the fact that we have 24 Israeli civilian casualties and almost 800 wounded, those are terrific numbers, extreme numbers, but we're talking about a nation state with very significant capabilities. I had a look at the early assessments, what we thought the Iranian response would be, and what we're encountering is about a tenth of that, and that is important. Yes, air defenses have not been perfect. I think that they are still best in the world. I don't know any other country that has anything similar. And I'm very grateful that those have been the priorities of consecutive Israeli governments, to invest in the Home Front Command, to invest in very expensive interceptors, radar systems, and all of the defense architecture that we have. And, you know, yes, maybe Israelis are surprised, but at the end of the day, most Israelis who have been, you know, the sad reality of casualties, the casualties, except for 2 people who were inside a shelter in Petah Tikva, and unfortunately their house was hit directly. All of the other fatalities have been of people that were outside of their shelters. And I think there's still, unfortunately, complacency. Israelis need to be vigilant and respond quickly. I'm sure that our viewers do that, but at the end of the day, those who are in Israel, but at the end of the day, I think if we look at the graph of the amount of missiles fired, it is in steep decline. Their capabilities, the Iranian capabilities, are being degraded, but there's no room for complacency. When you have a 400-kilogram large bomb flying towards you, even if it's only one, you should take steps.
All right, but what if this is a war of attrition? What are the consequences? For example, there's discussion about whether Israel's air defense systems are going to run out of interceptors, that the Iranians have more missiles than Israel has interceptors. How does the military and the nation need to prepare for that?
So I don't think that Israel has an interest in causing this to be an extended, drawn-out affair. And frankly, I'm not sure that the Iranians have the capacity to do so. Every day that goes by, more infrastructure and capabilities in Iran are being taken off the board. Leaders are killed. Missile launchers are taken out, and their nuclear infrastructure is dismantled, and that's only the beginning. Israel has the ability to strike far beyond what it is doing now and really grind or blow the Iranian economy to a halt. Israel hasn't done that. So if Iran escalates and if Iran indicates that they are trying to make this into a drawn-out affair, then Israel will say, okay, if you're trying to play tough, we will play tough, and we have much better tools and we have much better capacity to inflict serious damage. We can cause the Iranian country, force it to a standstill. blow up its harbors, its oil refineries, gas refineries, its national infrastructure, electric infrastructure, Iran, with its 100 million people, would be brought to its knees. Israel hasn't done that yet out of diplomatic and political considerations. But if Iran tries to shift the conflict in that way, I think Iran stands to lose much more than what Israel stands to lose. And interceptors, probably the most important piece of tech and equipment that Israel has at this time, along with air ordnance, bombs that we drop from airplanes. Both are provided by the US, and as far as I know, provisions are on time. I see planes landing, and I know that the Israeli air defenses are in good hands.
Yes, I finally do want to ask you, we should not forget that there is still a war in Gaza going on, and Israel is suffering casualties but making advances on the ground here. What impact, if any, does the Iran conflict you see having on the war in Gaza?
I would like to say that defeating Iran would have a significant effect on Hamas, and that Hamas would say, okay, our patrons were defeated, so we give up. I don't think that's going to happen, because Hamas has chosen a kind of a dead end. They are riding the dead horse called Gaza until it stops moving. That's what Hamas is doing. They have no qualms about havoc and destruction and whatever they are inflicting on the civilian population. And I think that they will continue down this road that leads to destruction, even though they know that there's no strategic way out. Hopefully, Israel will be able to turn our military advances in Gaza into opportunities to get back our hostages and to get Hamas to surrender at the end of the day. I struggle to see, I'm not as optimistic when it comes to Gaza and Hamas as I am when it comes to the mighty Islamic Republic of Iran. The Islamic Republic of Iran is now boxed in, and they're in a very difficult tactical situation. Hamas, with them holding our 54 Israeli hostages, still unfortunately enjoys leverage. And since they have said and indicated that, they don't care about the consequences, then that limits the leverage that Israel has over them and really forces Israel only to go to the military option and really to eradicate Hamas. So whenever we finish dealing with the Islamic Republic, we will have to, as you say, get back and to deal with Hamas, finish them, get our hostages back, and then start the very long and challenging process of rebuilding Gaza or building something different there that'll be good for Israel's security, but also good enough for Palestinians so that we don't relive this nightmare of Hamas taking control of it.
I do want to ask you, Jonathan, because you are a familiar face in international media as well, drawing from your experience as the former IDF spokesperson to international media. There's the battlegrounds, be it in the air, skies above Iran and on the ground in Gaza, but also in the arena of international public opinion. And since you are someone who is out there, how do you assess how Israel is doing in that regards, certainly as in connection with the conflict in Iran?
So I think with regards to Iran, Israel is doing slightly better. We can see the Prime Minister and others, but specifically the Prime Minister, actually assuming that responsibility of informing the public and reaching out to key audiences around the world. And that was missing for a year and a half in the war against Hamas. I think the Prime Minister delivered, if I'm not mistaken, 2 press conferences over a period of a year and a half. That is insufficient, that is negligence, and that simply means that that entire void, that's a void, a diplomatic void that is left open. Today I see with regards to Iran, good statements from the French, from the Germans, from the Brits, and passable statements from the G7. That, of course, indicates that there's diplomatic work being done by Israel behind the scenes. I know that the foreign minister is busy continuing the diplomatic efforts. That's good. And for the first time, I think, Israel, when you take tactical initiative, it looks as if Israel is also taking a bit of strategic initiative. But missteps and miscommunications like we had with Defense Minister Katz threatening to kill Iranian civilians are very damaging. It was a one-off, and since then he's corrected it, and I hope that he'll stay, on message. But Israel perhaps has a little bit more leverage here than last time.
All right, Jonathan Conricus, you always stay on message. Thank you for joining us on ILTV.
Thank you, Tel Aviv.
While Israeli pilots and soldiers waged their aerial war with Iran, Israeli civilians this past week have been waging their own battle on the home front against continual Iranian missile attacks, suffering casualties, facing displacement from destroyed homes, and coping with the disruptions of nearly every facet of normal life. Our journalists at ILTV have been out and about chronicling this daily and nightly struggle in Israel. Among them are Shosh Bedrosian, who was on the scene of today's missile strike that hit the city of Cholon just outside of Tel Aviv. And she joins us now from the field. Shosh, today, another devastating missile strike. Tell us about what you've been experiencing today and just, of course, over the past week.
Sure. Like you said, I've been one of the journalists at ILTV to be able to see a lot of these sites, a lot of the direct hit missile locations that were targeted during these Iranian attacks. Right now, there's a gate that separates us between the actual direct impacted site here in Cholon, but just over my shoulder, you can actually see some of the broken out windows. But the scene, Kalev, is demolished. You know, you have these very old buildings that experienced a direct hit, a hit from something that has thousands of explosive materials inside of it, nearly collapsing centers of buildings, collapsing other parts of the buildings as well. Thankfully, so many people got to their shelters in time, because if they didn't, we would be reporting on a very devastating situation here. But thankfully, that is not the case. We actually had Defense Minister Israel Katz and Itamar Ben-Gvir, come here to Cholon earlier before talking about Iran. We know that Katz issued a very stark warning to Iran today based on the events that unfolded this morning after the 7 a.m. alarms ran out. We know that Beersheba Hospital was also targeted. Cholon was also directly hit, in addition to Borsa in Ramat Gan, a very populated area. But let's make something very clear, Kalev. These are residential areas. I am surrounded by residential areas here. All homes, all apartment buildings, high rises even. And there are no Israeli government buildings in the vicinity of where I am.
Right. And we saw, for example, in the strike on Soroka Hospital in Beersheba, Iran targeting Israeli civilians who are showing their resilience under this fire. Shosh Bedrosian there in Cholon, thank you for that.
Thanks so much.
And now a final word. In June 1981, following Israel's successful strike on the Iraqi nuclear reactor in Osirik, then Prime Minister Menachem Begin declared, "We shall not allow any enemy to develop weapons of mass destruction to turn against us. This attack will be a precedent for every future government in Israel. Every future Israeli prime minister will act in similar circumstances in the same way." This approach has become known as the Begin Doctrine. And Begin was right. In 2007, Ehud Olmert followed the Begin Doctrine in ordering the bombing of the nuclear reactor being built by Syria. And now Benjamin Netanyahu has followed suit with the ongoing operation to destroy Iran's nuclear weapons capability. In each case, the country targeted was ruled by a regime that had waged war against Israel in various ways, with Iran's leaders repeatedly vowing to wipe Israel off the map. But this time, there are key differences between the current situation and the strikes on Iraq and Syria. That's due to the nature of the Iranian leadership. Not just a malevolent dictatorship targeting Israel, but a fanatical Islamist regime that has sought to dominate the entire Middle East by exporting its terrorist ideology through regional proxies. This is why, even while Israel's Arab neighbors may publicly issue pro forma condemnations, we see no real diplomatic blowback from governments privately happy to see the neutralizing of Iran's military machine. As Israel has said, the goal of this war is to eliminate the Iranian nuclear and ballistic threats, not regime change in Tehran. But even if the rule of the mullahs continues, its capacity to intimidate other states in the region has been severely undermined by Operation Rising Lion, along with the neutering of Hezbollah and the overthrow of Assad's Syria regime. This is likely to open up new political possibilities for Israel in the coming years, pathways to new regional alliances that would have been difficult to achieve in the face of continued Iranian aggression, and virtually impossible if the Tehran regime had attained a nuclear arsenal. Military action should always be a last resort for democratic states, but it must also always be a real option in the face of an implacable enemy. Israel's battle against Iran may ultimately have also blasted open new pathways to peace, towards a new Middle East in which the Begin Doctrine will no longer be necessary, but one which would never have even become feasible had the Begin Doctrine not been followed in the first place. Thank you for joining us on ILTV Security.